If you're someone who watches this channel regularly, it's unlikely that you're the kind of person who processes the world through the words of holy books and prophets. You probably approach claims of truth and falsehood in a very different manner than, for example, someone who follows the prophet Muhammad. But have you ever considered that maybe you do that because you're just stupid? And really what you should have been doing, if you actually care at all about getting everything right, is just pick a prophet and go, yeah, that guy seems to know what he's talking about, that'll do. Well, I found a speech from some guy who thinks he can convince us that that's exactly what we should do. But I have to say I'm not completely convinced that his intellectual reasoning holds up. Now, just to preface this comes from like an hour-long video, and 40 minutes of it are the actual speech. It's really long. And if I try to get to all of it, it's going to be excessively long and boring, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go through some of the earlier stuff and stop when I get bored, because I know that during that time he already falls flat on his face. So if you're looking for some sort of thorough, complete review of this, which you're almost certainly not, you're not going to get that here. I'm going to be skipping a whole lot of crap I don't care about. So if any of this feels like it's jumping around weirdly, that's because it probably is. If that happens, I'll leave it up to you to watch the original if you care enough, which I bet you don't. Enough screwing around, let's go.
So the first thing is, why do we need a prophet? We have to first of all discuss, how do we even reach the truth? So the Dears say that we have our own intellects, it's enough. But how does each person reach the truth?
Yeah, and when you think you've reached the truth, how can you be sure that you actually did? Philosophy.
So there are three main ways that a person can reach the truth. The first way is the internal, this Gnosticism, or the spiritual element.
Which I think is just a fancy way of saying, it feels right.
The second is is intellect. And the third way is by the sending of prophets and messengers who tell us how to reach the truth.
Which I think is just a fancy way of saying, that guy said it, and it feels right. But, you know, that's what this video is for, is to establish that it's not just that, and that not only is it not as stupid as that, but we actually need these prophets if we want to reach the truth. I shouldn't just be mocking the whole concept right out of the gate. I should pretend like I haven't heard people try to justify this position 50,000 times. Okay, let's get into the right mindset here. I'm a young man, just setting out into the world full of fresh-faced optimism, and a man who looks suspiciously like young Santa Claus in a nightgown stops me on the street and says, "Excuse me, sir, you need a prophet. I have one for you. Here." And I look at him in sincere ignorance, having never heard of this concept before. And I say, "Truly, sir, I don't even know what that is. Please, sir, what's a prophet, and why do I need one?" This video's going downhill fast.
So the first way is through Gnosticism, spirituality, which involves a person from being away from the people and leaving off desires, which is effectively monasticism.
Whoa. I hear this stuff from Christians all the time. People who are like, listen, I don't like the Bible, I don't like religion, I don't like the church. Ain't nobody gonna tell me what to think about my Jesus. I just pray to God, I talk to him, he tells me what to believe, I feel it, I know it's true, and that's the end of it. Now, of course, I'm not saying that kind of attitude actually gets them anywhere close to the truth. Quite the contrary, I think. But you're also saying it's flawed. Nobody here's saying it's a good idea. The point is, I don't understand why you're saying that the spiritual way of trying to approach the truth just inherently involves cutting yourself off from other people and your desires. That's weirdly specific. To be fair, I also don't know why you're calling this Gnosticism. And I guess it's not really that relevant, because clearly this is not the actual subject of the video. But it does get me curious about what strange connections you might draw going forward.
And the problem with this is that there's no proof. There's nothing that has been provided as proof to state that this is the main way to reach the truth, except through subjective experience.
Well, there's something I'm tempted to say, but then we'd probably get into a big discussion about how awesome the Quran is and how awesome Muhammad is and how awesome those things are as proof. Now, let's keep it focused.
That I had a dream, or I had this feeling, or I had this, or something happened to me, or that is very subjective.
Yeah, oh, believe me, I agree. But I can't help noticing how that sounds suspiciously similar to Muhammad talking about all of his experiences with the angel and whatnot. I mean, there's hundreds, at least, of random YouTubers who say the exact same kind of stuff now. Like that an angel or God or whoever literally visited them and told them something. And I agree that it's a big ol' unconvincing pile of nonsense. It doesn't prove anything, which is precisely why I reject the Quran. But again, I feel like we're creeping back towards a discussion about how great the Quran is and how great the Prophet is, so I really better stay focused here. I've done plenty of videos about various claims about how wonderful the Quran is, and how wonderful Muhammad is. I don't find it terribly compelling, but it's not the time or place.
Moreover, there doesn't have to be a contradiction between the soul, Gnosticism, and the mind, philosophy, or intellect, be using your intellect.
I agree, absolutely. There does not need to be a contradiction there. If you have some sort of spiritual experience that you can't explain or just don't bother trying to explain by any other means, and you draw some sort of line of reasoning like, I had a dream, or I had a feeling, or I had a psychotic break, or I did shitloads of drugs and saw the machine elves, and therefore God is real, you are definitely using your intellect. I don't think you're using it well, but you're using it.
Now, there are millions of people who are involved in this, and everyone has their own viewpoint. If it had been the truth, then they would have all agreed upon something.
Well, that's obviously not true. I mean, take all the rapture dream people on YouTube. I've probably watched hundreds of videos from those people, and they're all either incredibly vague or they contradict with each other. You know, they'll say the rapture is going to happen on a specific date, and it's totally different from the date the other guy said, that kind of thing. And okay, sure, maybe 9,999 out of every 10,000 of them are totally full of shit or delusional, whatever it is. But it could be one of them's right. You never know. I would be incredibly surprised, but you never know. Point being, maybe there is somebody out there who God actually came and spoke to and said, the rapture's gonna happen on December 1 week after this video with, and maybe that's true. Maybe they actually managed to reach the truth through this means. Just because other people who think the same thing's happening to them don't manage to reach the truth does not mean that this can't actually lead you to the truth. That's not to say I think they will, or at least not with any better rate than chance. I just don't think you've picked a very good argument against it. No, just saying that if it was the truth, they all would have agreed on it using this method. That's not a good argument at all. A better argument would be if this were a reliable method to reach the truth, then there would by and large be a decent amount of agreement between these people. You know, because the truth is one thing, and all of them are reliably proceeding towards it. But that's not the argument you made. No takebacks.
But then you find a lot of spiritual methodologies that they don't agree with one another.
Yep, that's true. The part that's confusing me here is that you're putting the reliance on prophets separate from this as if it's somehow more reliable. I mean, yeah, I guess if you have some sort of a book you can point to and say, we all rely on this, read the fucking book, then that helps to form more agreement, but look at all the religions out there, man. Even the ones with books and prophets, even the ones with some of your prophets. There's so much disagreement there between some of them that there have been wars and genocides committed over it. What the hell? And then even within religions, like Christianity and Islam, for example, there's major schisms. Not only that, but at times bitter hatred. Again, people have died over this. Catholic and Protestant, Sunni and Shia, Judaism and seemingly everybody. Religions that share the same books and the same prophets and still somehow can't agree. But if it's the truth, then surely they must all agree. I mean, the prophets are the best way to reach the truth. Is all this stuff about the unreliability of the spiritual way a criticism or an endorsement?
Now, the second way that people try to reach the truth is using their intellect, which is used by philosophers. So philosophers argue that they don't need prophets, but people need to use their own common sense and intellect.
Well, whether you need prophets or not, you're going to have to do that. Like I said, even that spiritual approach of just, well, I feel it and therefore God, well, you're still using your intellect. Reasoning poorly is still reasoning. And that's going to be the case with prophets as well. At some point, you're going to be reasoning about whether this guy's actually a prophet. Even if it's as basic and dumb as, well, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about, therefore everything he says is true. Or, my daddy said it, so I believe it. I don't consider these approaches non-reason-based approaches. I just consider them poor reason-based approaches. And I understand that when people make decisions based on their feelings or their desires, they may not be consciously thinking through things in terms like this, therefore that, but on some level that's still what's happening. I mean, if you just believe something because you feel that way, or if you believe something because you explicitly think to yourself, I feel this way, therefore I believe that, functionally speaking, you've done the same thing. You know, if some atheist starts pressing you about your reasons for believing in God or believing whatever you think God wants from you, you're going to start saying, well, I feel this way, therefore. So the difference is minor at best.
Now, the intellect God gave us makes the sending of prophets unnecessary. This is what they say.
Well, that's not a very good argument, is it? I mean, the thing about the prophets isn't that they are somehow a substitute for the intellect, right? I mean, the whole point is that they are basically giving you information from God. Hey, what's up? I'm the mouthpiece of God. Let me tell you all about the origin of the universe and about all the rules you're supposed to follow. And then you can take it from there, decide what you're going to do. That's your business, right? I mean, from the religious perspective, the point of a prophet is not to reason for you. The point of a prophet is to inform you, specifically about about things that you might not just get from empirically observing the universe or reasoning about it, right? Like, if Islam is true, you're not going to get ideas about Judgment Day and hell and praying 5 times a day just from sitting there reasoning, right? This is like hidden information that would have to be revealed. Now, I mean, obviously, I don't think any of this is true information. I'm just saying, if people say what you just said they say, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That's all.
So Ibn Rushd, a Muslim scholar who is sometimes known in the West as Averroes, who died in 1198 in the Gregorian calendar, he argued that if it was the main way to reach the truth, if the intellect or philosophy was the main way to reach the truth, then all the philosophers would have agreed on the same thing. But that's certainly not happened.
Okay, that sounds like the same argument you made before, but it's not. The argument you made before was, if it's true, then everyone should agree on it. But now the argument is, if the intellect is the main way to reach the truth, then everyone should agree on the same truth. Or to be a little more loosey-goosey about it, everyone should at least gradually converge towards the same truth. Which, again, is not true, frankly. I mean, okay, for one thing, we're assuming that there's some main way to reach the truth. Strange concept, really. I would have said best way to reach the truth. The one that has the best results. But if the only 3 ways to reach the truth really are just to feel it, which is the spiritual way, to sit there thinking about it, which is the intellectual way, and to get it from prophets, if these really are the only 3 ways, and still not everybody using any given one of them manages to agree on the truth, I guess it's possible that maybe every way to reach the truth has flaws. Even the best way. Maybe no matter what we do, we're stuck having to second guess ourselves, double check our reasoning, triple check our reasoning, check it against some external source, meaning the world, not a book, interrogate other people's reasoning when they present it to us, question people's stories, question people's motives, even question our own senses, at least to some degree, because we can be fooled just as well as everyone else can. And I have to say, I fail to see how that does not line up perfectly with reality. I mean, that seems to be exactly how it is. No matter which of these methods you pick, people do fail to agree on things. Of course, that doesn't mean that one of them can't stand out head and shoulders above the others, especially once you start introducing checks and balances to try to make sure that you're not introducing your own biases, and when you start basing it on actual observation of reality. That is, when you actually admit that there are flaws in your intellect, and so you start to take steps to mitigate that. That's when you start to cut out a lot of the error potential and start to see convergence onto a single truth. That occurs exclusively within the intellectual category. The spiritual and the prophet categories have failed at this completely. So right off the bat, that intellectual one is much more appealing. I mean, if I'm going to choose a way to figure out what's true, I'm probably going to choose the one with the best track record.
Very similar argument used against Gnosticism. Now, the intellect is limited and cannot see the metaphysical. The metaphysical are things which are the unseen, such as paradise and hellfire, such as the day of judgment, resurrection, and so on and so forth. They can only focus on the observable.
Well, of course I agree. If you make up an idea and define it as scientifically and logically undetectable, then you're not going to detect it by those means. You're not going to come to the conclusion that it exists, but you're not going to be able to reliably come to a conclusion about whether these things exist through any of the other means either. So why wouldn't I just slap a big ol' X to doubt on it and get on with my life?
Now, the intellect cannot reach the details of legislation and behavior, only broad concepts.
I'm detecting just the tiniest bit of begging the question here. You know, we can't detect the legislation and behavior, by which I can only assume you're referring to universal objective morality. Well, at this stage, why are we even assuming that's a realistic concept in the first place? I mean, it would seem to me that morality is based on values, and values are something that people have. So when you come up with a moral system, it's going to be based on some sort of human values. Generally speaking, humans value things like safety, survival, family, even certainty and group cohesion, and so on and so on. You know, avoiding some sort of bad outcome that they're afraid of for some reason. And their moral systems tend to reflect those things, including the religious ones. I've always been impressed how, for all this talk about how God is this incomprehensible, transcendent, cosmic entity, this mind-warping Lovecraftian nightmare, the moral systems he supposedly sends down all seem deeply, deeply human. They seem to almost exclusively address petty human concerns. Security concerns like murder and theft. Reproductive concerns like marriage and adultery. Issues of certainty and group cohesion like not wanting to hear people bad-mouthing your religion. Or wanting people to go to the gathering place and proclaim their allegiance to the same idea. Or not liking people from outside the tribe. Just basic animalistic kind of concerns that people come up with just as well without God as they do with him. And then of course you throw in a few weird superstitions people have picked up over the years, pretty much on par with some football player being concerned about which socks he wears. It's all these human-centric rules, really non-cosmic, non-transcendent kind of stuff. Very similar, in fact, in the broad strokes to what secular societies come up with just to try to protect their own citizens, protect their way of life, make sure they can eat tomorrow, try not to get sick, maybe create some sort of national identity. I don't know, I'm not even really talking about what you're talking about anymore. I'm just kind of off in the weeds rambling. Expect a lot of that. I'll probably just use a lot of this as a springboard for my own thoughts on things. Frankly, I find this speech really boring, so my mind's kind of wandering.
As Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the Genevan philosopher who died in 1778, he argued that the intellect guides us to the truth, but it does not lead us to the details of that truth.
I don't know or care what Rousseau had to say. I haven't read him. I'm probably not going to read him. These philosophers are just people like you and me. If Rousseau said it or if Ronald McDonald said it, I don't really care. Just tell me the idea. And just from what you presented about the idea, it sounds kind of dumb. I mean, science is an intellectual pursuit, and it's all about details. In fact, it's painfully focused on details. Reading actual scientific literature is a complete slog because of the details. Now, it's possible you're exclusively talking about morality, but you didn't clarify that. But if you are, I don't think there's some objective set of details of morality anyway. So if that is what you're talking about, my response would pretty much just be to reject the need for knowing such details in the first place, because I don't think they exist. Whatever, man, I keep getting off track here. This is going to keep going forever if I keep going at this rate.
So prophets give us a legislation, they give us a system of how people should live, and people will not be able to legislate for themselves.
What? We do that all the time. Of course we can do that. We literally have places called legislatures that do nothing but legislate. Now, you might not agree with it. You might prefer some sort of rules that come from God. That's your personal preference. I don't care. But you said we can't do it. Well, we do it. Tough shit. And if you want my opinion, I think Muhammad and every other supposed prophet did the exact same thing. Here are my rules for how I think you should live. Okay, maybe you don't think Muhammad did that, but what about Joseph Smith? See, humans can do it.
Right? Everyone's read, what's that book by Golding? I've forgotten the name now. We read it at school. Lord of the Flies, right?
You mean the one where they legislate that whoever holds the conch shell is the one who can speak? I mean, okay, it didn't work out all that well, I get that. But again, that seems very typical in human societies. It seems downright realistic. And I certainly do not just mean in secular countries. I guess I'll leave it up to you to find examples from religious ones. That should be real hard. No Lord of the Flies shit going on in the Muslim world, is there?
So let's just take an example. Students of a school will not be able to educate themselves. This is why we need teachers, we need staff, we need management, so on and so forth.
Well, yeah, but that's because there's so much knowledge. Human society, without God's help, has gathered so much information about the world that it takes like 13 years to catch a kid up to the basic level. In 13 years, they basically get a little Cliff's Notes book that's supposed to represent an entire library of shit that we've figured out all by ourselves. I'm not really seeing the argument against the human intellect here.
So as we can see, the need for prophethood is a necessity as it compensates for the deficiency that is found in our intellect and also in our soul.
Kids need teachers because they don't immediately know everything that humanity collectively has discovered over thousands of years, and therefore we have deficiencies in our intellects and souls and need prophets. What does your conclusion even have to do with your premise there? You didn't lay out reasoning, you just said a thing and then asserted a different thing. I guess that's your flawed intellect. I don't really know why you're trying to establish any of this through intellectual means if the intellect is so terrible. Yours in particular.
So a number of examples that we cannot reach the truth or reach some truths based on intellect and on spirituality alone, such as knowing God.
Yeah, especially if there isn't one. That'd make it a real hard truth to reach.
Knowing him through his names and attributes. They cannot be reached by the intellect. The intellect may lead you to the existence of God.
Yeah, you see why I don't disagree with you that the intellect is flawed? I'd have to ignore stuff like that.
But it will not show you the details of God in terms of his names and attributes.
I've always found this fixation on names really weird. Like attributes, yeah, okay. And the names of God in Islam really are just attributes. The compassionate, the merciful, the eternal, so on and so on. It's just, I mean, if those actually are attributes of God, you could still describe them with those, even if you call them like Bob or Doug or whatever you want to call them. Point being, why don't we just say attributes? Just seems inefficient. Oh well, no big deal.
Also, human beings are subjective because of their desires. Perhaps someone can say that I don't like meat. I don't like meat, so it's impermissible, it's haram. So the criteria has now become the desires.
And it should be somebody else's desires.
And in fact, most of the laws today, if you think about it, are biased, right? They're all subjective.
Well, they're based on a subjective set of values, sure, I'll agree with that, but they're trying to address those values in an objective way, similar to how you want people to follow Islam and obey Islamic rules. So if you're the type who likes, for example, Sharia law, you might say, I really want the Sharia implemented. Well, that's just subjective too. I want people to join Islam and not go to hell. Yeah, no subjectivity or bias there. Hell, even if God does it. I want people to pray to me 5 times a day. Okay, good for you. I want people to fast during Ramadan. Good for you, Muhammad. I mean, Allah. Now it's an objective desire because you want it.
Some systems, they lean towards rich people. Some systems, they lead towards, they are biased towards men. Some systems, they favor poor people, as an example.
Some systems are biased towards Muslim people.
So our subjectivity is based on our desires.
You phrase things in a really weird way, but yeah, generally you're going to adhere to some system of morality that reflects your values, that gets the world somehow closer to how you hope it will be, which is why some Muslim governments introduce Islamic law into their countries, because that's the way they subjectively want the world to be. They believe a thing, they believe it's a good thing to believe that thing, and to behave in accordance with said thing, and so they build their laws on that foundation, just because they feel like it. This is identical to how every other society on Earth does it. The only difference is what the foundation is. If you wish, you can say that your foundation is better, that living in accordance with it and making laws in accordance with it makes people's lives better, if that's what you think, but that doesn't mean your foundation's true. Alright, I'm gonna cut it off there, and I'm gonna come back for a part 2 because I know that a little bit later in this video there's something incredibly dumb that's said. And quite simply, I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I showed you all this stuff and I didn't show you that. So come back and join me, subscribe if you haven't. If you want early access to videos, you can either sign up on my Patreon for very early access, or you can sign up on my email list for less early access. We have something like 7,500 people now on that email list, it's pretty amazing. Seems to be going over quite well. Anyway, if you don't mind, before you go, slap a like on the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.